Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Yesterday, in this magnificent book entitled Romanism and the Reformation by Henry Grattan Guinness, we learned that despite what we've been told, despite what is taught in the churches, the Protestant reformers, and not just the Protestant reformers, but every Christian prior to the Protestant Reformation, were historicists in their interpretation of Bible prophecy. That they believed that the prophecies of the Bible, and particularly the book of Revelation, was an account of the entire church age. That it is history told in advance of the entire church age, from the first century Christians after Christ all the way until Christ's return. And in an effort to prove this, the author Henry Grattan Guinness is giving us 8 points proving that assertion. Now, this is contrary to the teaching of Rome. Rome wishes to interpret the prophecies in such a way as to not include the entire church age, but that all the prophecies of the Bible are fulfilled in the pagan Roman Empire prior to the rise of papal Rome, or at the very end of time, concentrating all the fulfillment at the end of time, completely blinding us to the fulfillment of the prophecies throughout the Christian era. And this is a concerted, diabolical attempt to exonerate the papacy from its cosmic crimes that it has committed upon God's people throughout the Christian era, marking him as the man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist of the Bible, the little horn of Daniel. Rome desperately wants us to believe either in the preterist view of school of interpretation or the futurist school of interpretation. But the Christians prior to our time, all the way back from about 4 generations ago, all the way back to Christ, were historicists in their interpretation. They were unanimous on this. The prophecies foretell the events of the entire Christian era. And the rise of Antichrist comes at the beginning of that Christian era. And the Antichrist rises in power and strength and blasphemies, growing steadily, more steadily, and killing the saints of Almighty God. And eventually her sins reach unto heaven. Christ returns and destroys her. That's the historical view. That is the Protestant view. It is neither preterist nor is it futurist. It is historicist. It's the only interpretation of the Bible that makes sense. And it's the only interpretation of the prophecies that can be verified by history. Now, H. Grattan Guinness gave us point 5 yesterday. I'll read it, and then I'll remind you of a quote that we gave yesterday proving it. Point 5. The fathers. Now, we've all heard about the church fathers, Origen, Chrysostom, Eusebius, the church fathers, they call them. God forgive me. They are referred to as the church fathers. It says the fathers held that the Roman Empire was the let, the L-E-T, or the hindrance referred to by the Apostle Paul in 2 Thessalonians, which kept back or restrained the manifestation of the man of sin. Okay, this point is of great importance. It was the Roman Empire, the pagan Roman Empire, that is, as long as it remained intact and in place and ruling the Roman Empire, it was virtually impossible for the man of sin to be revealed. This is what the so-called church fathers believed. And we gave a lengthy quote proving that assertion. And I will read a portion, a condensed portion of that quote. Now, the author asserts that these church fathers believed that this restrainer was the pagan Roman Empire. That after its demise, papal Rome would come to power. The great beast, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the little horn, the Antichrist of the Bible. And Christianity understood this so thoroughly that they prayed diligently, fervently, for the continuance of the pagan Roman Empire, despite the fact that the pagan Roman Empire made sport of killing Christians, feeding them to the lions, burning them on crosses, torture, torment, every kind of crime against Christians. That is, before the conversion of Constantine, they say. Now, here's a part of the quote proving. He says, there is also another and greater necessity for our offering prayer in behalf of the emperors, nay, for the complete stability of the empire, and for Roman interests in general. For we know that a mighty shock impending over the whole earth, in fact, the very end of all things, threatening dreadful woes, is only retarded, is only let by the continued existence of the Roman Empire. We have no desire, then, to be overtaken by these dire events, and in praying that their coming may be delayed, we are lending our aid to Rome's duration. Unquote. That's from the Apology, pages 30 and 32. Look, the Christians, as mightily as they were persecuted under the old pagan Roman Empire by the Caesars, they prayed for its long continuance because they were convinced, they understood Paul, that when the pagan Roman Empire was broken up into 10 kingdoms, then that man of sin would be revealed. And then God's people would be mercilessly tormented. And history reveals they were absolutely correct. Now, the author on the top of page 195 asked the question, what then was the view of the early church? Look at the words of Tertullian. Quoting Thessalonians, he says, quote, now ye know what detaineth, that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now hinders must hinder until he be taken out of the way. What obstacle is there but the Roman state, the falling away of which, by being scattered into 10 kingdoms, shall introduce Antichrist, that the beast Antichrist with his false prophet may wage war on the church of God, unquote. Again, from Tertullian's Apology, page 32. Now, in his magnificent apology addressed to the rulers of the Roman Empire, Tertullian says that the Christian church Not himself, not himself, mind you, but the Christian church prayed for the emperors and for the stability of the Empire of Rome because they knew, quote, that a mighty shock impending over the whole earth, in fact, the very end of all things, threatening dreadful woes, was only retarded, only restrained, only let by the continued existence of the Roman Empire, unquote. Where's the futurism in that? Where is the preterism in that? Nowhere. These Christians, as all true Bible-believing Christians throughout history, were historicists. They looked for the fulfillment of the prophecies of Daniel, of Paul, and of John the Revelator throughout history. And those pertaining to Antichrist were only to begin, though the mystery of iniquity was already among them. The Roman beast, the Roman pagan empire was persecuting Christians, that it would come to its full realization in the man of sin at his rise after the empire had been destroyed and broken into 10 kingdoms. That history was going to unfold and be fulfilled according to the prophecies of Daniel, Paul, and John. Now he says, read the words of Chrysostom, another one of the so-called church fathers. Read the words of Chrysostom in his commentary on 2 Thessalonians. Quote, one may first naturally inquire, what is that which withholdeth? And after that would know why Paul expresses so obscurely. He's quoting Paul now, he says, he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way, unquote. That is, when the Roman Empire is taken out of the way, then he shall come. Antichrist shall come. And naturally, for as long as the fear of this empire lasts, the Roman Empire lasts, no one will readily exalt himself. Antichrist cannot come to power. Nobody will readily exalt himself. But when this is dissolved, when the Roman Empire is dissolved, he will attack the anarchy and endeavor to seize upon the government both of men and of God. For as the kingdoms before this were destroyed, that of the Medes by the Babylonians, that of the Babylonians by the Persians, that of the Persians by the Macedonians, that of the Macedonians by the Romans, so will this be by Antichrist, and he by Christ. Okay? He's reciting Daniel. Daniel was foretold the rise of 4 successive empires, Gentile empires. Babylonian, Medes, and Persians, the Grecians, and then finally the Romans. And this Roman Empire, this 4th beast, would be taken over by Antichrist, the little horn, the Antichrist, the papacy, and then he by Christ, the last kingdom on the earth, Christ's heavenly kingdom. He continues, he says, then accounting for Paul's reserve in alluding to this point, he adds, quote, because he says this of the Roman Empire, which was in power at the time, he naturally only glanced at it and spoke covertly, for he did not wish to bring upon himself superfluous enmities and useless dangers. For if he had said that, after a little while the Roman Empire would be dissolved, they would now immediately have even overwhelmed him as a pestilent person, and all the faithful as living and warring to this end." Unquote. In other words, Paul had to express himself covertly when he wrote the letter to the Thessalonians so as not to excite the emperor and to bring destruction upon himself and God's people by alerting the emperor that the prophecies indicated that the Roman Empire was going to be destroyed and that they would be linked to a plot to destroy the Roman Empire. But Paul had to get the message out to the Thessalonians. When you see the Roman Empire break up into 10 nations, 10 kingdoms, then look out. He had to express it in terms that would not excite the Roman emperor and bring down an army against him and his people. Now, this is perfect common sense. But we know, despite these covert terms, this covert language used by Paul in this letter that could possibly fall into a representative of the Roman Empire and be hustled off to Rome to excite the emperor, when Paul was speaking face to face with the Thessalonians, he wasn't covert in his speech. He wasn't using code words. He spoke frankly. That God had revealed to him that when the Roman Empire is destroyed, the man of sin would be revealed. And his people would be condemned and persecuted worse than had ever been upon the face of the earth throughout history. So caution was necessary. But we need not be deceived or confused about what Paul told the Thessalonians, because history has revealed what Paul told those believers in Thessalonica. The Roman Empire did fall. It broke up into 10 kingdoms, and the little horn that was prophesied by Daniel did rear its ugly head. It had eyes like the eyes of a man, a seer, a bishop, and a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies against the Most High. And he still does today. Make no mistake. Don't let any man deceive you. That man of sin has been on this earth just as prophesied for the last 1,800 years, killing and deceiving God's people. Historicism is the truth. Preterism is a lie. And equally and more devastatingly consequential is the lie called futurism. Now he's going to recite another so-called church father, Irenaeus, who lived close to apostolic times, down to Chrysostom and Jerome. The fathers taught that the power withholding the manifestation of the man of sin was the Roman Empire as governed by the Caesars. The fathers therefore belonged to the historic and not to the futurist school of interpretation as the Roman Catholic Church would have us all believe. For futurists imagine that hindrance to the manifestation of the rise to the man of sin is still yet in the future. Okay? The futurists imagine that the hindrance to the manifestation of the man of sin is still in existence, though the Caesars have long passed away. Rome would have us believe that the restrainer is still in place. And guess who she would have you believe is the one who was restraining the rise of Antichrist. The Pope, the man of sin himself. See how clever futurism is? And this is why no one takes it to heart. All the bloody centuries of history, the papacy killing God's people, nobody takes it to heart because the Antichrist hasn't come yet. Why, the Pope might even be considered the great restrainer of the rise of Antichrist. How deceived can the world be? Did God just jump over all those centuries? Did God just ignore all the millions and millions and millions of the saints of God who were slain by the Roman Catholic Church? Didn't he even give them a passing glance when he wrote his Bible? When he gave us the prophecy of Daniel and of Paul and of John? Did they just leap right over the entire bloodlust of the Roman Catholic Church as insignificant? We must give our God the credit that he deserves. And give the saints their rightful due. And put the blame for their slaughter where it belongs, on the man of sin, the son of perdition, and that church that is drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And who in his right mind would think of ecumeniacally reuniting with this whore of Rome? Revelation chapter 17 describes her in vivid color. It can't be mistaken, not by anybody who has any concept of history. Living color is the description of the Roman Catholic Church in Revelation 17, and they tell us that prophecy can't be understood. It hasn't been fulfilled yet in history. Good gracious. Point 6. The fathers held that the fall of the Roman Empire was imminent, and therefore the manifestation of Antichrist close at hand. Justin Martyr, for example, one of the earliest of the fathers, in his Dialogue to Typho, chapter 32, says, quote, "He whom Daniel foretells would have dominion for times and a half, is already even at the door, about to speak blasphemous and daring things against the Most High," unquote. Cyprian, in his Exhortation to Martyrdom, says, quote, "Since the hateful time of Antichrist is already beginning to draw near, I would collect from the sacred scriptures some exhortations for preparing and strengthening the minds of the brethren, whereby I might animate the soldiers of Christ for the heavenly and spiritual contest," unquote. You know what? We need a Cyprian today. We need a Cyprian today to exhort God's people and animate the soldiers of Christ for the heavenly and spiritual contest.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left-behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. We're talking about the pre-Reformation interpreters of the prophecies. And we're going all the way back to those who are known as the Church Fathers. What did they believe about the prophecies of Daniel, Paul, and John? That they were merely foretellings of history, all of the Christian era, beginning with the rise of Antichrist, the fall of the pagan Roman Empire, which was already showing the signs of the mystery of ungodliness, but which would be culminated in its replacement, the papacy. Point number 7, he says the fathers held that the man of sin or the Antichrist would be a ruler or head of the Roman Empire. A striking illustration of this is in the interpretation by Irenaeus and Hippolytus of the mysterious number 666, the number of the revived head of the beast or Antichrist. Irenaeus gives as its interpretation the word Latinos, Latinos, which means the Latin man. The Latin man. He says, quote, Latinos is the number 666, and it is a very probable solution, this being the name of the last kingdom, for the Latins are they who at present bear rule, unquote. Now you might wonder, how could they equate the word Latinos with 666? You simply take that word and you replace the letters with their numerical equivalents. In the Roman system, their letters were also used as numbers. Okay, the letter L being, 50? And the letter I being number 1, the letter U and the letter V, which they used interchangeably, had the value of 5, and an X has the value of 10, and so forth. Latinos has a numerical equivalent of 666. As a matter of fact, I read years ago on Inquisition Update and a whole list of titles that are arrogated to the papacy, official titles recognized by the Roman Catholic Church as his titles. I think there were something like 30 of them. And every single one of them totals 666 under the Latin system, the Roman numeral system. And even the most recent title, remember these church fathers had not yet heard the term Vicar of Christ. I mean, it was like the Vatican says, well, you've got 30, here, add this one, Vicar of Christ. And it, too, totals 666. It's as if the papacy is in your face trying to identify itself with the 666 of the Bible. And that all of these titles equate to 666 is a probability that doesn't even exist in the whole universe. The likelihood that all of his titles equals 666, if you were to count the permutations and the possibilities, the number would be endless. That's just how in your face the papacy is about its identity with 666. And let me tell you, the history of the papacy is just as in your face as that described by the Apostle Paul, the Apostle John, prophets, Paul and John, and the prophet Daniel. They told it straight because they got it straight from the throne of glory. Now, Hippolytus gives the same solution in his treatise on Christ and Antichrist. Hippolytus says, too, it's the papacy, 666, the Latin man. Number 8, the fathers held that the Babylon of the Apocalypse means Rome. On this point, they were all agreed. They were unanimous, and their unanimity is an important seal on the correctness of this interpretation. Tertullian, for example, in his answer to the Jews says, quote, Babylon, in our own John, that is the book of Revelation, is a figure of the city of Rome, as being equally great and proud of her sway and triumph over the saints. Unquote. Chapter 9. Victorinus, who wrote the earliest commentary on the Apocalypse extant, says on Revelation chapter 17, quote, the 7 heads of the 7 hills on which the woman sitteth, that is the city of Rome, unquote. Hippolytus says, quote, tell me, blessed John, apostle and disciple of the Lord, what didst thou see and hear concerning Babylon? Arise and speak, for it sent thee also into banishment, unquote. It speaks of Rome. It was Rome who sent John into banishment. You notice here the view that Rome, which banished the Apostle John, is the Babylon of the Apocalypse. Augustine says, quote, Rome, the second Babylon, and the daughter of the first, to which it pleased God to subject the whole world and bring it all under one sovereignty, was now founded, unquote. Rome. In chapter 28, he calls Rome, quote, the Western Babylon, unquote. In chapter 41, he says, quote, it has not been in vain that this city has received the mysterious name of Babylon, for Babylon is interpreted confusion, as we have said elsewhere, unquote. It is clear from these quotations that the fathers did not interpret the Babylon of the Apocalypse as meaning either the literal Babylon or on the Euphrates, or some great city in France or England, as Rome would have us believe, but as meaning Rome. And this is still the interpretation of the historic school of Bible prophecy, though for more than 800 years events have proved Babylon to represent Rome, not in its pagan, but in its papal form. It should be noted that none of the fathers held the futurist gap theory. Nicholas at First Amendment Radio, prick up your ears. It should be noted that none of the fathers held the futurist gap theory, And I described it earlier, where God just jumped over the whole history of the Roman Catholic Church, the whole church age, and focused all of its attention either at the beginning of the church age to look for Antichrist, or at the very end of it to look for Antichrist. It's absurd. And yet it is the orthodox teaching of the churches today. What blindness. Again, he says, it should be noted that none of the fathers of the church held the futurist gap theory like Chuck Missler preaches all over the world, deceiving God's people. Those who were closest to the apostles saw no gap theory. Chuck Missler, you deceiver, you Antichrist worshiping demon. None of the church fathers held the futurist gap theory. The theory that the book of Revelation overleaps nearly 18 centuries of Christian history, plunging at once into the distant future and devoting itself entirely to predicting the events of the very last few years of this dispensation. As to the subject of Antichrist, there was a universal agreement among them concerning the general idea of the prophecy. While there were differences as to details, these differences arising chiefly from the notion that the Antichrist would be in some way Jewish as well as Roman. It is true, they thought that the Antichrist would be an individual man. Their early position sufficiently accounts for this. But they had no conception, and could have no conception, of the true nature and length of the tremendous apostasy which was to set in upon the Christian church. They were not prophets, and could not foresee that the church was to remain 19 centuries in the wilderness, and to pass through prolonged and bitter persecution under a section of nominally Christian but apostate rulers, filling the place of the ancient Caesars and emulating their anti-Christian deeds. Had they known these things, we may well believe their views would have completely harmonized with those of historic interpreters of latter times. The fathers went as far as they could go in the direction in which historical interpreters of these last days have traveled. Further, much that was dark to them in prophecy has become clear to their successors in the light of its accomplishment. Divine providence has thrown light, as it could not fail to do, on divine prediction. Let me just say it another way. History, divine providence, history has thrown light, as it could not fail to do, on divine prediction, prophecy. History has thrown light, as it could not fail to do, on prophecy. You cannot understand the fulfillment of the prophecies, all your predictions, as well-meaning as they may be, all your prognostications, all of your speculations, as well-meaning as they may or may not be, fall flat on their face when these prophecies are fulfilled in history. And when they are fulfilled, let no man question them, because that is grievous error. To alter history or to hide history, as they have done with us today, is grievous error, one which will be punished by him who replaces this papal kingdom, the Lord of glory, the just judge of all heaven and earth. Those who alter history are intended to deceive God's people. Those who hide history from us will be judged God wants his people to understand when Bible prophecy is fulfilled minutely as his prophets foretold. And that can only be seen in history. To modify history is equivalent to modifying the Scriptures. Woe, woe, woe to the historians who take liberal use of their pens to alter history. Woe, woe, woe to the winners of the wars of the world who bastardize history to cover up the truth. They will pay the price. They will pay the recompense. Just as those who alter the prophecies. Just like those who alter the Scriptures. You Jesuits, you Romans, you Antichrists. Number 2, we come now to the second place very briefly to review the history of the prophetic interpretation in the interval extending between the fall of the Western Empire of Rome and the development of the papal theocracy in the 11th century under Pope Gregory, or rather Antichrist Gregory VII. The interpreters of this period belonged, like the fathers, to the historic school. They interpreted the apocalypse as a prophecy of the whole course of events, from the first advent of Christ to the consummation, his return. The following authors lived in this interval. The following authors living in this interval wrote commentaries on the entire the apocalypse. Primasius, the Venerable Bede, Anspert, Hamo, Andreas, Arethrus, and Berengard. Primasius, who lived in the middle of the 6th century, interpreted the, quote, 144,000, unquote, sealed persons in the apocalypse as the Christian church. He held that the Antichrist would substitute himself for Christ and blasphemously assume his dignity, and that the seven-hilled city was Rome. No futurism in there, is there? The Venerable Bede, who lived in the north of England at the close of the 7th century, was an historical interpreter of the apocalypse. Here's a copy of his commentary. He takes the first seal to represent the triumphs of the primitive church, the apostolic church. He expounds the lamb-like beast of Revelation chapter 13 as a pseudo-Christian false prophet. Ambrose Anspert wrote a copious commentary on the apocalypse in the middle of the 8th century. He expounds the second beast of Revelation 13 as meaning the preachers and ministers of Antichrist. How about that one? And teaches that Antichrist will be pro Christo, or in Christ's place. Interesting. Isn't that what the Pope's title is? Vicar of Christ? In Christ's place? It is a remarkable fact that he expounds the grievous sore, quote unquote, sore, or ulcer, poured out under the first vial as meaning infidelity. Now, let me just stop and tell you there are other expositors, historical expositors of the prophecies that say that sore foretells the Black Plague that was the scourge of all Europe as God's answer to the Roman Crusades. They loved death. They killed God's people. They led crusade after crusade after crusade to silence the apostolic church. And God recompensed them. They loved death so much. They decimated all of Europe fighting these crusades. All the men of fighting age had lost their lives in crusade after crusade after crusade to expand the territory, the jurisdiction, the power, and the influence of the god of this world, the papacy. And for that, God recompensed them with the Black Plague. This is the general view, returning to the text, this is the general view at the present day among historical interpreters. They consider the infidelity of the French Revolution to be the fulfillment of this vial. Hamo's commentary, written in the 9th century, is for the most part abridged by Anspert. Andreas, who was Bishop of Caesarea, states definitely that the apocalypse was a prophecy of the things to happen from Christ's first coming to the consummation. He interprets the 144,000 as meaning true Christians and Antichrist to be a Roman king and pseudo-Christ or false Christ. Arethrus, who wrote in the 9th century, mainly followed Andreas. Baron God's commentary on the Apocalypse, written in the same century, is the least satisfactory of all, says the author. He was a Benedictine monk and lived at the very dark period. His notion was that Antichrist would be, quote, an avowed infidel and an open advocate of licentiousness, unquote. And if that applies to the papacy, I'd sure like to know why his commentary is regarded as the least satisfactory. He was, as far as is known, the first interpreter to propound this view, says Mr. Guinness. The interval during which these interpreters lived was marked by the steady rise, but not by the full manifestation of the papacy. Two notions contributed powerfully to prevent their recognizing in the imperfectly developed papacy the predicted man of sin. They imagined that as the Eastern Empire of Rome, seated at Constantinople, still continued, the let or the hindrance to the manifestation of Antichrist remained, completely overlooking the fact that the anti-Christian power foretold in prophecy is definitely linked with the seven-hilled city of Rome, not Constantinople, and thus with the fall of the Western Empire and the apostasy of the Latin or Western Church. Then they spiritualized and explained away a great deal of prophecy and supposed that they were living in the millennium and that the Antichrist would not be manifest till the brief outbreak of evil at its close. There might be the first indication of futurism. But that was not that which was held by the vast majority of God's people. He says this false notion had fatal consequences. Let me read it again. This false notion had fatal consequences. And isn't that what I've been saying all along about futurism? If we could only conceive the fatal consequences that are going to arise from futurism, as first evidenced by the ecumenical movement to reunite the Protestant churches back to the horror of Revelation 17, then we can understand the fatal consequences that is going to result from those of us who will never go back to Rome and bend our knee to the Pope. The first expression of futurism brought about fatal consequences, and so will the current one. He says, while these interpreters, in common with the generality of Christians at their period, were looking for the advent of the man of sin in the distant future, he stole unperceived into their midst and usurped the place of Christ over his unwatchful flock. There is the first result of the first teaching of futurism. Antichrist stole in within their midst unawares by those who were deceived by futurism. Those who were so watchful, having seen the pagan Roman Empire destroyed and broken up into 10 kings. began to think along the lines of futurism, that we don't see Antichrist. Maybe we're living in the millennium. And even while they were in that great delusion, Antichrist was seated in Rome, expanding his power and influence, subtly overtaking the unwatchful flock. And that's precisely what's happening today. Watch the death toll sound all over this country and the world. Inquisition update. There'll be more tomorrow from this most magnificent book, Romanism and the Reformation.
Gold and silver is tremendously undervalued. Global demand vastly exceeds mine supply by more than 60% annually. There is little in the financial world more certain than a coming explosion in the prices of gold and silver. The U.S. dollar continues to lose value and respect as the world's reserve currency. Our nation faces challenges on many fronts, and a day doesn't pass without another economist bringing forth warnings of impending economic calamity. There has never been a better time than right now to acquire physical gold and silver. Discount Gold and Silver Trading was founded on the principles of truth and honesty. We believe in providing a quality product, quality service, and most importantly, competitive pricing. We provide all forms of precious metals, including American gold, silver, platinum, and rare investment and circulated coins. Silver bars, rounds, and 90% silver bags are on hand for the silver investor. Gold self-directed IRAs are available. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, that's 1-800-375-4188. Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.